We got the engine in place, and after sliding the crossmember back as far as we could, we found that the motor mounts actually slipped right into the motor mount holes on the crossmember with no modification, so perfect. This is the steering knuckle. It carries the front brakes and the wheel. I've put new wheel bearings in it, and it connects via this new ball joint as well. It connects to the control arm. The control arm connects to a tab on the crossmember, and this defines the up-down range of motion that the wheel is allowed to travel. So the next step is we're going to install the strut that holds the car up above the wheel, basically. And the problem is the EA81 car has these 2-bolt strut tops, but we're installing the EA82 strut, which has this 3-bolt top, which is much like what you find in an EJ car. There's actually a slight modification, and you can use EJ tops. And there's several ways we can adapt this to the 2-bolt mount, but what we've chosen to do is we have these 3-inch strut top spacers, and the top has the EA81 mount that'll bolt right into the strut tower, and the bottom has the 3-bolt EA82 that'll bolt right onto the top of the strut.
Where's the random parts?
So the long side goes forward?
Pointy side goes out, and long side goes forward.
Long side goes forward.
Yeah. You might want a hand with that.
So the front of the steering knuckle has this little rod sticking out, and that connects to the tie rod, which is eventually connected through some gears to the steering wheel. When you turn the steering wheel, it pulls that tie rod back and forth, which will turn the wheel, and that's how you steer. This is the EA82 tie rod end on the left and EA81 tie rod end on the right. You can see the 82 is slightly longer, maybe half an inch to an inch, and that's going to help me get the reach I need to reach the EA82 steering knuckles from the EA81 rack. Okay, so we found that even with the longer EA82 tie rod ends, the tie rods weren't long enough to reach the hubs and allow us to set the toe correctly. So we're going to have to use the EA82 tie rod itself, which as you can see is about an inch longer than the EA81 tie rod here. That'll give us an extra inch on each side, which is perfect. That's just what we need. Whoops, problem with that last plan. This EA82 tie rod has a male end, the 81 tie rod has a female end, so that's not going to work. Can't use the EA82 tie rods on the EA81 rack. So what we're going to have to do is just lengthen the EA81 tie rod. And now I have the front brakes and hub on. So this is the EA82 brake caliper, which I rebuilt, and the EA82 rotor. It's just the old rotor for now. Eventually I'll upgrade it. We found a little bit of a problem here is that the brake lines aren't long enough to reach the caliper. So I'm going to have to get a longer brake line, but that's not too big of a deal. The hub, as you can see, is a 6-bolt deal. So this car originally comes with a 4-bolt hub. Here, 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 and here. And it's a weird 4x140mm pattern that no one makes wheels for. So to get easier wheel fitment, we switched to this 6-bolt pattern. It's the 6x139.7mm, also known as 6x5.5 inch. It's very common size for small trucks. And the reason we went with that pattern in particular was because if you knock these 2 studs out of the original 4-bolt pattern and then bolt the 6-bolt onto these 2, the wheel marks where the other 4 bolts need to be. The last piece of the suspension puzzle up here is this thing called a radius rod, or I've also seen people call it a tension rod. It bolts into a rubber bushing which is attached to the frame back there, to the chassis, and the other end of it bolts to the control arm. And this is to give the control arm front-rear stability because the tabs up here aren't actually very strong. Our problem is that after mixing and matching different parts and doing a lift, that it no longer quite lines up. So we have the 5-speed transmission mounted up instead of the 4-speed now, but the 5-speed transmission, despite having an extra gear in it, is actually shorter than the 4-speed. So this is the original drive shaft, and it's not long enough anymore to reach from the transmission to the differential. This is the drive shaft out of the wagon which donated the 5-speed. It is long enough. It happens to be just the right length if you're using a BRAT or a wagon as a swap candidate. If you're using a hatch, then you have to have a custom drive shaft made because nothing bolts up. Luckily, we're just going to be able to bolt this guy up. However, the only complication with that is since it's two-piece, it has this carrier bearing in the middle, and there's nowhere on the BRAT to bolt that to, so we're going to have to fabricate mounts for the carrier bearing. Okay, we have the rear end of our drive shaft bolted up right here, pointing with my shoe because I'm stuck under a car. That's very simple, it's just 4 bolts. And now we're going to slide the front end into the transmission, which has a slip yoke that goes in right here. And that's possible because we haven't mounted the carrier bearing yet, which would make it too long otherwise. Otherwise, you would have to put this end in first. Another thing to mention is this transmission has a mount on the rear that stabilizes the shifter. This has nowhere to bolt into on the BRAT, so we're going to have to make a little mount for that. That feeling when you get the whole thing reassembled and then find one of your gaskets still lying on the table. Well, I threw the intake manifold back on and reconnected all the electricals and fuel lines and such. I was thinking about starting it up, but I changed my mind because it doesn't have a cooling system in it right now. And I just threw new cams in the engine, so when I start it the first time I'm going to have to run it for about 20 minutes to break in the cams. And I think it would overheat before I got to that point, so I'll just wait off until I have a cooling system. Instead, I took the opportunity to pull some hoses that I wanted to replace. There's that one I found the other day that was cracked, and this guy's too short, just slightly. And then all these red ones are perfectly fine. I just want something that's not ugly and red and looks like a garden hose. So that's it for now.